Welcome to Mad Nomad Rex TV. I'm Rex and this is Beanie. For today's gear review, we're going to take a look at the 4 basic tents in Walmart's Ozark Trail Clip and Camp tent line. These budget tents get overlooked sometimes because people think correctly that Ozark Trail is the cheapest, most poorly made gear available. However, it's also the most inexpensive and most easily available gear, and used within its limitations can be a good value. Now, I've run into a lot of people who are new to the on-the-road lifestyle who spend a lot of money they didn't have to spend on gear that's not much better than the Ozark Trail gear. I've spent the last 3 months testing these 4 tents under a variety of conditions, and I reinforced these tents a bit, which I'll cover in this video also. I hope this video is useful for some of you. Be sure to thumbs up and subscribe. Ozark Trail has a well-earned reputation for cheap as well as inexpensive camping gear. I started with the smallest and least expensive tent in the Walmart sporting goods department. The Ozark Trail 3-person clip and camp dome tent is 7 feet by 7 feet and 44 inches at the center and weighs just under 6 pounds. It's very easy for one person to set up, and I use this tent through several minor desert thunderstorms, but I also reinforce my tents by wrapping a tarp around them like a burrito. I also want to point out, if you're new to these tents, it's physically impossible to put a 110-inch queen air mattress in an 84-inch by 84-inch tent, and most of the other marketing is equally accurate. The tent sets up very easily using plastic clips that clip into the poles rather than the old style where the poles went into sleeves. The older style was much stronger, and the clip system increases the number of places the tent is likely to fail. Now, these tents all have one common weakness in addition to the janky clip system, and it's the way the poles clip into the holes for the doorways. The pole causes the clip to rotate, and when the wind hits it from the right direction, the poles and the clips pop out because it's already twisted and in a bind. It's one more example of how the people who design these tents almost certainly have never been in one. I used the 3-person clip and camp dome tent for a little over a week and set it up and took it down 5 times before one of the corner clips broke off, and I traded up to the 4-person version. However, I was pleasantly pleased at how well the little tent stood up to the desert wind. I had several occasions where the wind collapsed the poles and the entire tent was pushed down on top of me, and then it sprung back up into place once the wind passed. If you're looking for a tent to throw in the car and use occasionally under semi-decent conditions, then the 3-person clip and camp dome tent is a reasonable value. It's not the best tent in that price range and size, but it's easily available and easy to return if it breaks. If I wasn't planning to trade up anyway, then I would have been comfortable getting another one of these tents. A quick tip when you're setting up these dome tents: as you put the tent pole into the plastic foot clip, take a moment and clip the lower couple of clips onto the pole, which will let it stand up on its own. I've seen people struggle with these tents and turn setting one up into a team exercise in frustration. These are some of the easiest to set up tents on the market, so don't make it harder than it has to be. I upgraded to the 4-person clip and camp dome tent and used it successfully for several weeks through some moderate storms. At 8 feet by 8.5 feet and 50 inches high, it gives a bit more space and breathing room. If you're going to be in stormy weather, then this slightly larger tent is better than the 3-person tent because the wind will be pushing the sides of the tent inward and it'll leak wherever it touches you or your gear. The 4-person clip and camp dome tent puts up just like the 3-person tent and just as quickly. The poles are noticeably thicker, which helps with the weather also. I used a 10-foot by 20-foot tarp and wrapped the tent like a burrito. You lay the tent out with the front of the tent facing outward along the short side of the tarp. Then you can wrap the tarp up and over the tent and pull up the sides and get some extra reinforcement from the wind as well as some insulation. You're not going to accidentally hermetically seal yourself up in a tent with this method, and it will still have plenty of ventilation. I can easily recommend the 4-person clip and camp dome tent for casual car campers, and I'll probably get another one to use for times when I'm traveling and just want a quick overnight camp without setting up the entire portable house. I moved up to the 6-person clip and camp dome tent after the weather ran us out of the Manzano Mountain State Park, and I wanted something big enough to put a heater in. The 6-person clip and camp dome tent puts up exactly like the previous 2 tents, using the same clip system, and it's just as easy and quick to set up. At 12 feet times 8.5 feet and 72 inches high, this tent was tall enough to stand up in and big enough to use a Mr. Heater Buddy portable propane heater, which is a big deal in October. I'm a huge fan of those heaters, so watch for a video about that coming soon. Don't leave summer without one. The 6-person clip and camp dome tent was a nice change after the shorter tents. After 2 months in stubby tents, I was ready for one I could stand up in. The 6-person clip and camp dome tent was decently stable in the wind and better for fall camping. I couldn't burrito wrap this one in my current tarp, so I ended up getting a small tarp for a ground sheet and putting the 10 by 20 tarp over the top. What I did not like about this tent is the vertical space. While it has a 12-foot by 8.5 foot footprint, the steeply slanted walls made it very cramped when standing up. Having said that, the big floor gives you room for a heater, and the lack of vertical space makes it easy to heat, which is a big deal in the fall. While I probably won't get another one, I can easily recommend this tent for casual use. It'll stand up decently well through most weather, especially if you tarp it down. I have been pleasantly surprised by the 8-person clip and camp dome tent. After the cramped innards of the 6-person model, the hoop design on this tent was a shock. While it's only 4 feet longer and 6 inches more narrow than the 6-person tent, the hoop design is freakishly more spacious. Rather than a dome tent design of the previous 3 tents, the 8-person clip and camp dome tent has vastly more usable space. It's basically a 16 by 8 portable Quonset hut. It also sets up differently than the previous 3 tents. You lay out the tent on the ground sheet, put in the 2 pegs at the end without the yellow pull handle, put the hoops in place and lay them flat on the ground, and then you can grab the yellow pull handle and drag the entire tent vertical. It takes me about 10 to 15 minutes to set up the basic tent without the reinforcement. I've been using this tent for a month and have set it up several times, and I'm extremely happy with it. To the point that I'm not looking to trade this one up, but rather to experiment on how to reinforce it and use it in worse weather, since worse weather is on the way. I definitely recommend this tent for people who are new on the road and looking for some portable living space. There are better tents in this design that are stronger and will hold up longer and handle the weather better, etc., etc., but none in this price range and ease of availability. Watch for some follow-up videos about this tent as I wind and weather test it. These summer tents all have one thing in common, aside from the weak poles and janky clip system. They all have a lot of screen, and I love bug screen except in the fall, winter, and spring when it stops being ventilation and starts being indoor wind. My cheap portable hoop house has great ventilation screen on top and on the back, and that's great in the summertime when you can leave the fly off and sleep under the stars without the bugs. The rest of the year I use tarps and bed sheets to insulate the tent and manage the drafts, and it's very simple. When I set up the tent, I throw some large flat bed sheets across the vent screen. The sheets don't add any significant weight, but they close off the vent screen and keep the wind from blowing through it all night. I add a tarp over the top of the fly and stake it down. The tarp gives a noticeable layer of insulation while helping reinforce the tent against the wind. Ozark Trail tents are not the best for this strategy because they tend to have the smallest, weakest poles commercially available, so they're only going to stand up against so much wind to start with. That's just physics. It's easily possible to overweight these tents, which increases the likelihood that they'll collapse and turn inward. On that note, a fairly heavy thunderstorm hit my camp in October while I was using the 6-person model. I had left the windows and back fly open and then went to town to run some errands, which is always when the storms hit. I had set the tent up with the back of the tent facing the prevailing wind, so when the storm hit, it collapsed the poles inward and collapsed the back of the tent. When that happened, the tarp over the top slid down and covered the back windows, and the wind, blowing from behind the tent, didn't blow into any of the front windows at all. So I came home to a perfectly dry tent after a thunderstorm that blew some limbs off trees here. Now that's more about being watched over from above than being a crafty woodsman, but I try not to depend on too much grace with the weather. The upshot of all that is that these tents can be a useful resource and they can stand up to some pretty heavy weather when properly reinforced. And they're easy to trade back in if they fail, which is a major bonus when you live in it full time. I can recommend all 4 tents in this series for different uses and reasons, and I'm extremely pleased and amused with the portable house that the 8-person clip and camp dome tent has become for Beanie and I. We hope you enjoyed this look at Walmart's Ozark Trail Clip and Camp tent line, and hope some of you find this useful and maybe save a few bucks on your own travels. You may have noticed if you've watched our videos so far that Beanie doesn't like it when I hold him and talk to the camera. He does like it when I wrap him up in my coat on cold winter mornings and walk around with him. We appreciate all the new subscribers, and be sure to thumbs up and subscribe to our videos to see where we're going next. Happy trails and thanks for watching.